But as we wrap it up today, I just had this thing that I was noticing throughout all of the resurrection stories with Jesus. I'd like to recognize it together, and then simply just talk together about how we can recognize Jesus in our time. Very specifically, how can we recognize Jesus and what he's doing, what he's saying, what's going on in our current lives, in this spring, going into the summer, and in this community. Okay? So, back to this Ascension Sunday in the church calendar, so we celebrate that Jesus literally goes back to the Father. It's an important theological thing to remember that he went back to heaven. He is seated at the right hand of God. He's seated on the throne, and he promises us that he will not leave us alone. He promises that we'll do greater things than he did, which is also pretty crazy and mysterious. And a big part of that is that he says, I'll be with you to the end of the age. And it's the promise of the Holy Spirit. It's the promise of the Spirit of Jesus to be with us, and that we won't be alone. And so we'll talk about that more next Sunday as we celebrate Pentecost Sunday, when the Holy Spirit drops, comes on the believers, and it's the start of the modern church. And next Sunday as well, we'll celebrate 6 years as a church. And so we started on a Pentecost Sunday. We had a preview service, a trial run 6 years ago. And so we'll celebrate that and remember that and what the beginning of the church looked like and what it should look like for us today. So, as we wrap up this resurrection, all the stories throughout the 4 Gospels, Jesus reveals himself over and over again. And so today we're going to talk about how to recognize Jesus. So I think there's a slide behind me to set us up. It's from John 21. This seems like one of the last stories of Jesus with some of his friends in all these resurrection stories. John 21 says, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. Have you ever read over something and just missed it? But I'm thinking about that, and I'm like, at this point, throughout all the stories, you put all the 4 gospel stories together, they've clearly seen and interacted with this resurrected Jesus. But they don't recognize him. What's up with that? They don't know it's him. What's up with that? We're going to talk about that for a moment today. Listen, sometimes we don't recognize someone that we should be able to recognize. You with me on that one? Like in the middle of the night, me and Virginia are sleeping, and Bubba, he'll just come running, and he's like a certain size, and he's really fast. So we always just think someone's attacking us. So we hear these little feet coming really fast. So like half the night, me and Virginia just wake up and we're like, oh, what's going on? And it's just like Bubba, he's running up, he's trying to give us a hug. It takes us a moment to recognize him. But by the speed and the height and the voice and the whole thing, we should know that it's Bubba. He's just running around in the middle of the night. I had a story of people not recognizing me 2 weeks ago. You ready for this one? I was unrecognizable, and it was a little scary. So I was cutting my own hair. I've been married 20 years. I realized I have to find my wife just in the right moment and just in the right mood to ask for the haircut. It's a thing where we don't fight a lot, but we can fight if everything isn't just right for this haircut. So I realized Virginia's taking a nap. I think it was like a Saturday morning. We're just hanging out. It's hot, so I have my shirt off. So I'm like, I'm just going to go get the party started. So I go in the bathroom, I cut my own hair. So I'm going around. I'm like, I can't get there. So I just stopped mid-haircut. And I'm like, I'm going to wait for Virginia to finish this haircut. So I don't realize what's going on. I got hair all over me. I got my shirt off. It's hot. I go sit out on my front porch. It's a sunny day. And I'm drinking my coffee or reading or something. And Annie Janie's kids walk by. I think Annie and her family were a little sick, so they're walking around the neighborhood. They had a neighbor friend walking her kids or something. And so this lady is walking with Henry and Olivia. And I'm like, hey, kids, from across the street. I'm excited to see them, waving at them. And they're like, hey. And this lady is trying to play as cool as possible. But she looks over at him. She's like, do you know him? You can tell she's trying to be nice, but also something about me is terrifying her. And she's like, are you supposed to say hi to him? You don't talk to strangers? Very much Henry's like, no, it's Pastor Rick. And they're all about it. They're happy. And they're like, oh, that's your pastor. And I still don't understand what's going on until then a couple minutes later I stand up and I see myself in my, the storm door, the glass door, my reflection. And again, my shirt's off. I don't realize my hair's up to here. And I got hair all around me. I look like Teen Wolf or something. It was terrifying. And I realized, of course, this lady should have been concerned. But the kids can still recognize me. Listen, sometimes we don't recognize someone that maybe we should know. And I wonder if that lady will ever come to our church. Ever. It seems that in one of these resurrection stories, that Jesus is unrecognizable. Okay, so listen, we're gonna go about for a minute, but Mary goes to the tomb. She thinks he's a gardener. The guys walking from Emmaus that we've talked about the last couple weeks, they think he's just like the most wildly uninformed stranger that's ever come across. You know? Are you the only one that doesn't know these things? That's what they say to him. Can you imagine also Jesus just taking that for the moment? They're like talking down to him like, are you the only one that doesn't know what's going on? He's like, oh, he was really in the middle of the story, guys. Thomas had to touch his wounds to believe. Two of the women disciples share that they saw Jesus, but the men don't believe him. And only after he appears, like Terry said, to 500 people for over a month? It seems like that this story we read today in John 21, he meets them by the water, and they still don't recognize him. So what's up with that? Even after they've seen him, and he said it, and he's shown their body, and all these different things. So all the stories of people meeting Jesus resurrected, they don't recognize him. Which leads me to put all of these stories, all of the mystery, put them all together and conclude that for us today, maybe we miss him sometimes. If these guys walked with him for 3 years, and all these different stories and all these different things compiled together, and they're missing him, as he's already showed himself to them over and over again, maybe you and I miss him. Maybe with all of the shootings and the brokenness and the racism and the continual chaos, maybe we lose a little bit of our spiritual creativity. Maybe we lose a little bit of our open and vulnerable and trusting heart to what God wants to say and do in our time. Maybe we don't take other people's stories serious, like when the women came. And the men are like, I don't know. Do we take each other seriously? Are we listening to what God's doing? Are we sensitive and open to what he's doing in our time? And that's all we're going to talk about today for a moment, all right? And listen, all these stories, I'm going to share a couple of them. They're going to be on the slide. I couldn't help but see as I was looking at all of them this week that the only times he was recognized, the only times resurrected Jesus was recognized by his friends, was after he did something familiar. Can you holler out familiar? Familiar. Do it again. Familiar. Bill, I need more passion in it. Familiar. Familiar. Yes, thank you. Bill, you're going to say first, second call out. I feel like you are. You're the only one that laughed at my Rickroll on Easter, so I feel like you're my bud, you're my bro. Listen, it was only when he did something that they had already experienced with him that they recognized him. I want you to hear this. It was only through something that they already knew between them and Jesus that he was known again. So I'm going to read a couple of them to prove it to you, if you just think I'm making this up. I got 8 of them. In John 20, Jesus affirms with his voice that it's himself. Only after Mary hears Jesus say, Mary, it's me, does Mary then realize it's him. Which makes me think of my own life. I have some familiar ways that I believe God's always talking to me. It's not when I go to Walmart and I realize that one parking spot was open and that was me. I'm like, yeah, that's the Lord. He's speaking, he's there, he loves me. One of them for me is I've always taken the creation account of like there's a breeze and the Lord walked in the breeze. So whenever I get alone and I get quiet with God, I can't make this up to you, like literally almost every single time. If I get quiet enough and I'm really there and I'm really present, there's even for a moment a slight breeze that comes across if I'm outdoors, especially in the spring and summer. And I take that as the Lord talking to me, as the Lord with me. So listen, in this moment, Mary's in a garden and Jesus is walking. And she only recognizes him after he says her name. Are there personal, intimate ways that you've met with the Lord? And you need to recreate those. You need to go back to those. Maybe it is the garden. Maybe it is getting up a little early. Maybe it is that place, that story. Look back on what happened. Secondly, he breaks bread with those on the road to Emmaus. Did you notice that? We talked about that story, but Jesus is only recognized after he broke the bread, which it seems with the disciples he was doing all the time. Which, by the way, we're going to do today. We break the bread in remembrance that he is with us. So he's only recognized after they break the bread together. Next one, he makes a breakfast by a fire with his close friends in John 21. I'm making this up. I'm stretching this. Okay, this is not the text, right? Because we just read the Nicene Creed, so no one yell at me I'm a heretic. Was there a way that he made the fish? was the way that he set up the fire. I like to imagine creatively, like there was some specific ways Jesus did things that even in that he's recognized. Oh, I understand. He always blackens the fish too much, overgrills it. Listen, the women in the Gospel of Matthew, they had to touch him. They took a hold of his feet. That's something I've always read over in Matthew. They literally touched him. It was a personal touch. They grabbed a hold of his feet. And then after there was the touch, they worshiped. It was a personal experience. In Mark 16, he appears to two friends in another form. Another thing I've always read over. What was another form? You know? What was he doing there? And then he appears to 11 disciples as they were reclining at the table. Jesus was accused by the religious leaders as a drunkard and a glutton. And he meets them again, reclining at the table, hanging out, having time together, sharing each other's stories, being together with one another. Sometimes we make this stuff so complicated, and it doesn't seem so complicated as they're reading this, right? In Luke again, in Emmaus, as they were talking about all these things that happened, he appears and eats with them. Jesus only appears to them after they're talking about everything and wondering what's going on and sharing stories together. In John 20, maybe this was for you, they had to go back to where the miracle happened. Then they believed, and they saw the empty tomb. They had to go to the tomb themselves and be like, yep, he's not there. Those cloths were on his face, and they're now there, folded nicely and neatly. You can't make that up. He must have risen from the dead. I shared something today about God providing. I'm going to continue to leave that prayer request in my calendar to be reminded that the miracle happened. I don't know about you, but I forget. Oh yeah, God answered that prayer. Next thing, I'm really needy, God, I need this. Sometimes we need to build memorials. We need to look back on our journals. We need to look back on what God did. Maybe it's a photo. Maybe it's a thing in your house that reminds you of the thing. Maybe it's a certain destination that reminds you what God did in that time in your life. But sometimes you need to go back to the empty tomb. You with me on that? Sometimes you need to go back where you're like, so that was clearly God. I cannot deny it. Maybe I'm doubting him today, but I know he's alive because he did that. For me, I can simply look at my Google Calendar right now, fresh and new, and be like, God answered that. Literally, clearly, definitively, that was God. All right? So sometimes maybe you need to go back to the last miracle. And then finally, I end with this. In John 21, these disciples are fishing. He hollers from them from the shore. They don't recognize him. It's only after they obey him and then they see a miracle happen that they know it's him. Jesus, again, like something he's already done with them, says, cast your net. And they're like, we've been fishing. We don't got nothing. Okay. They put the net again, and they could hardly carry in the fish load. And with the miracle again, after obeying his voice again, they realize it must be him. Let's go have some breakfast. So, it seems that God's always doing something new, and for us to be aware of it, we need continually open, vulnerable hearts. I don't know about you, but in the time we live, it's just impossible to not become hardened in your heart. I don't know someone that's not really carrying some baggage. I don't know how we can't be cynical. You know? We look around us continually like, that fell, that's awful. But yet there's this Jesus that rose from a tomb, got out of the tomb, rose from the dead. And we need to remember him, keep our hearts tender, and see what he's doing in our time. And so this is all I close with. I'm going to pass off to Lauren. She leaves with a couple of discussion questions for us. I think some of the things and the ways that we recognize Jesus in our time is by going back to the ways that he's always worked. For some of us, it's listening to his voice early in the morning in the garden. For some of us, it's experiencing his miracles through obedience and listening. Oswald Chambers so famously wrote in this devotional, My Utmost for His Highest, are you not experiencing God? Go back to the last thing he said and do it. You know, he goes back to obedience. You didn't obey the last thing, so I expect him to do something new with your life. Maybe you need to go back. Maybe you just need to have a meal with some friends and share your stories and be reminded of God's goodness. Maybe you just need to listen to the person's stories and take them seriously and realize God's doing something in their lives. Maybe you need to go to that place that he last worked, that he last did the miracle. Guys, all I'm simply sharing, and then I'll hand off to Lauren, is this. We have to remember. We have to retell. We have to touch him in tangible ways that we always have. So, for me this spring and summer, it's really simple. I get up early, the sun rises on my face on my front porch, and I feel the gentle breeze. And I'm reminded that he's with me. And I open the scriptures, and I say, speak. Your servant's listening. I realize in this season of my life, I need to hear other people's stories. There's so many bad news. It's like, I need to hear what's going on with people and meet with them. I come to life when I'm hanging out with other people. When I'm sitting with a Mr. Michael Klaus under the moon on a late Sunday night. When I'm having coffee with Lauren Wacka. I'm hearing who you are and what God's doing. And that speaks to me fresh and new. So what will it be for you in this season as we go into a beautiful spring and summer?